leading a team in that environment, it's a challenge in and of itself. And I won't cop out by that as the answer. But when you think about taking a nuclear reactor and a piece of steel and bringing it underwater, that's just the cost of getting there. And it's not how the wiring is inherently as a submariner. You want to deliver and continue to deliver. And that's how you brought up through the ranks to your task, accomplish the mission, deliver the goods, and rinse, repeat.
Well, I think you keep the mission focused by your interaction with the crew you're leading and keeping them informed of the importance of the mission and what you expect of them for what you're about to do or what you're doing.
And so taking whatever opportunity comes your way and then going and doing the most with it and the very best you can with it, even if your background is like so many of ours. I mean, I didn't know anything about the Navy. I didn't know anything about submarines, and I probably could have tried to refuse to go into submarines, but it turned out to be the absolute best thing that I could have ever done.
African Americans have a long history of naval service. First, with state and continental navies, and then with the United States Department of the Navy in 1798. Since then, Black Americans have continued to distinguish themselves ashore on ships, aircraft, and submarines through times of peace and conflict. Today's African American sailors stand proudly knowing the accomplishments of their predecessors, including the sailors who earned the Medal of Honor during the Civil War, Dick Henry Turpin, one of the survivors of the explosion aboard the battleship Maine, and the Black female yeoman who enlisted during World War I. The U.S. Navy planted the seed for racial integration during World War II and trained a generation of outstanding Black officers and enlisted personnel who provided critical leadership and expertise during the Cold War. As trailblazers meeting the challenge during the 1960s and 1970s, African Americans began commanding ships, submarines, and shore establishments. In 1974, the Navy issued its first Equal Opportunity Manual and issued its first Affirmative Action Plan 2 years later. And now, as in previous periods, Black officers and enlisted personnel have continued to stand out among the Navy's best and brightest, gaining recognition in their roles as trailblazers. Since the United States Submarine Force was established in 1900, only 7 African Americans had held command of a submarine by 2000, which marked the first 100 years, centennial, of U.S. Submarine Force history. In this rare group photograph taken at the Bay of STEM Conference, the 7 stand in the order they took command. From left to right, Captain Pete Toms, 1983, USS Houston. Rear Admiral Tony Watson, 1987, USS Jacksonville. Captain Will Bundy, 1988, USS Barble. Vice Admiral Mel Williams, 1994, USS Nebraska. Captain Joe Peterson, 1994, USS Dolphin. Admiral Cecil Haney, 1996, USS Honolulu. And Vice Admiral Bruce Grooms, 1997, USS Asheville. C.A. Pete Toms, the first African American to command a nuclear-powered Navy submarine in 1983, died in June 2019. While serving as commander of the Recruit Training Command, Great Lakes, one of the Navy's boot camps, Captain Toms won the Black Engineer Award for Affirmative Action in 1991. Dr. William F. Bundy, who won a 1993 Black Engineer of the Year Award for Outstanding Achievement in Government, died December 2019 at 73. He was responsible for several midshipmen being admitted to the Naval Academy and the highest number of applicants admitted to the broadened opportunities for officer selection and training, the BOOST program. In this archived pre-COVID-19 interview, Career Communications Group sat down with retired Rear Admiral Tony Watson, retired Vice Admiral Mel Williams, retired Admiral Cecil Haney, and retired Admiral Bruce Grooms at a BAYASTEM Conference Stars and Stripes event. Captain Joe Peterson was not available for an interview. Also taking part in the interview were retired Navy Captain Richard R. Bryant and Captain Melvin Smith, former Division Chief of the Joint Staff, Strategic Deterrence and Nuclear Policy. These men represent a new generation of submariners mentored by the Centennial Seven.
In the United States military, it became what's called an all-volunteer force in the year 1972. That means that you had to raise your right hand and you wanted to be there to be in the military. Well, the United States Submarine Force was started in the year 1900, and from the very beginning, everyone had to be a volunteer. So the United States Submarine Force is the original all-volunteer force.
The first black commanding officer of submarine was Pete Toms. Spells his name Tzomes, but he pronounces it Toms. We lost Pete this last year in 2019, but he was the first amongst us. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1967 and went through some very challenging times in a very unique, small, representative 6% typically of the Navy are submarine folks, 6%. And he was the first out there when no one else, no other African American was out there. That itself was a challenge, as it is for any minority in a group where you're one of tens of thousands of people. But he worked hard not just to deal with that issue, but to overcome it. And part of Pete's attitude was, as he dealt with these challenges of first having to know all these things about nuclear physics and thermodynamics, navigation, weaponry, all those things we have to know to operate a submarine. He had to deal with all this information that he needed to know, and then he had to deal with those other challenges that he had in a what we call an officer corps. On a submarine, there's in the dining facility a room we call the ward room that derives from the Navy days of old, when on pirate ships they used to put stuff they captured, the ward that they captured in this room, and that's where the officers eat and gather. And he was always just the only one there. So Pete viewed that as not a challenge because he was the only African American, but as an opportunity to teach other people what being African American and competent and qualified to operate a submarine was all about. So he's always now and always will be number one. We call him number one of the Centennial Seven. He'll always be here as number one. We'll always know him as that. And the man put up with a lot to help pave the way for the rest of us. Just an amazing man. Chancellor A. Pete, we called him, Toms.
Once again, I'd like to provide a little perspective. When you step back and look at what has transpired, the commissioning source for many officers in the United States Navy is the United States Naval Academy. The U.S. Naval Academy was established in the year 1845. In the first 124 years of the Naval Academy, that's all the way to 1969, there were only 35 African Americans that graduated from the Naval Academy, 35. Captain Pete Toms was one of those 35. So big picture, not only was he the first African American to command a submarine, he's one of the first 35 African Americans to graduate from the U.S. Naval Academy. The second African American to command a submarine was Tony Watson, to my left. He graduated in the year 1970. Okay, that's the year after that first group of 35. So these are trailblazers, is what I'm communicating to you. And I just remember as Ensign Williams, who graduated from the Naval Academy in 1978, I was walking at the submarine base, Groton, Connecticut, and there was a screech that came from a window in one of the quarters. And it was Pete Toms. It was Commander Pete Toms. And so I stopped in my tracks, and I found myself summoned and had a session with him. First introduction to Captain Pete Toms. He was a commander at the time. And I think Admiral Haney had a similar thing where we're there. But basically, number one, pulled in us as ensigns, talked to us about being an officer, submarine force, etc. And throughout our careers, he touched our lives and helped us along the way. So being number one was special. And I just remember Pete Toms with that screech. He's got a fiery spirit, and you knew when he was talking to you.
We had the uniqueness of meeting Captain Pete Toms. Toms, when we were very junior in the business, we had finished nuclear power school and its prototype, and we were now into through the training of our basic submarine officer course. And that was the first meet. I didn't know him before. And quite frankly, the whole thing of submarines was relatively new to me. But I'll tell you, this energetic individual, you could tell right off the bat, was technically and operationally smart. And he drilled into us a motivational speech that, quite frankly, carried us through the rest of our career, you might say. It was, in some regards, candid. And yes, you can do this, but it was, you will do this and you will do it well. And stick to what you've learned, and quite frankly, so we were awestruck. I was awestruck at just the opportunity to see him at that stage, at the very beginning of your business of becoming an officer in the submarine corps.
I remember my first meeting with Pete as if it were just yesterday, and he had come to the Naval Academy. I was on the staff there. And so he was this post-commanding officer who came to talk about his experiences and his life on board submarines and other things. So I met Pete at this event, and he's sharing some stories about his life. And frankly, as a young lieutenant, I probably thought I was being put upon, and I had some difficult challenges myself, and I was frankly whining about some of those challenges. And so I whispered in Pete's ear, what do you do about this? Let me describe this circumstance. And so Pete looked me in the eye and he said, listen, sailor, I can top your stories 10 times over. You better buck up and get to work. And so Pete was a tough, love-giving guy, but it made all the difference in the world because here I was viewing my life as a challenge, and over the years getting to know him better, my stories paled in comparison to what he experienced, yet he shared that with us and made us better. And I'll just take a second, you'll probably get to this, but we haven't had a chance to talk about Dr. Will Bundy, who was number 3. And Will was the same kind of guy. He was actually the very first submarine officer that I met as I was going to my very first ship. And so I'm strolling down the pier on a wintry day in Norfolk, Virginia, and I hear this same screech that Mel mentioned. And he said, come here, young man. And so here are these two guys, and he introduces himself. And he invites me to his home. We have a wonderful dinner. And so Dr. Will Bundy, although he's not with us anymore, he was the exact same kind of person that had this great impact on all of us. And we certainly miss him dearly as we miss Pete Toms.
Not everybody knows about nuclear submarines. Think of it in terms of a vessel, steel vessel, that's about a football field plus 20 yards long. It doesn't look like that when you see it in the picture when it's sitting alongside a pier in Norfolk, Virginia, or San Diego, California. But it's about 120 yards long. It weighs on the order of 15 million pounds, about 33 feet in diameter. with thick enough steel that you can take that submarine deep. And what's amazing about the ability to connect with and be part of that submarine operation with a crew of a little over 100 people is that all of these young people are experts in what they do. We have experts in electronics, experts in sonar, folks who not only are very skilled and adept in listening to and distinguishing between sounds. Everybody's heard of Jonesy on Hunt for Red October. They listen to and distinguish the sounds, the difference between whales and snapper shrimp and things of that nature. And one unique thing, for example, is when on a trip to the North Pole, we stopped on the way in what's called the marginal sea ice zone where icebergs are melting. And if you've ever taken an ice cube and dropped it in a glass and you hear it crackle, multiply that times about 50 million as you see an iceberg that's 500 feet in length, 100 feet above the surface and about 400 feet below the surface. And it's crackling like that ice cube, except millions of times greater. So much so that a sonarman can sit on and watch with earphones on for only about 15 to 30 minutes before he has to be replaced by somebody else. It's continuous sound. It's those kinds of different, unique things that make operating on that vessel very unique to us as commanding officers, because we're responsible for not only the technology that runs the submarine, but for leading the people who are the experts that make it work on a day-to-day basis.
The technology in the submarine has changed significantly since 1900, but the basic principles remain the same. The nature of the operation of the ship submerged for prolonged periods of time require basically making sure that you adhere to a certain degree of discipline with regards to how you operate that ship. So at the end of the day, we want to keep the water on the outside and the people safe and dry on the inside. And knowing the ship, one of the things we take pride in is getting the qualification in submarine warfare, both enlisted and officer, which requires us to have a very extensive working knowledge of the operation of the ship and the concept, especially in warfare, of being able to fight the ship, to fight damage, to recover from things that may occur is a source of pride. There is a brotherhood and sisterhood now that we have integrated crews that purports that. The other part is the missions that we do. Mm-hmm. We support very unique intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions, which support not only other naval forces, but other forces within the Air Force, Army, and Marine Corps. You can take a great deal of pride away from that as well, knowing that something that you do on a daily basis contributes to the overall picture.
We don't know what path we'll be on and where we'll be led. And so taking whatever opportunity comes your way and then going and doing the most with it and the very best you can with it, even if your background is like so many of ours. I mean, I didn't know anything about the Navy. I didn't know anything about submarines. And I probably could have tried to refuse to go into submarines, but it turned out to be the best thing I could have ever done. And then part of the beauty of the experience, I think, was that, you know, we learned this really special skill, and frankly, lots of these skill sets carry over into other parts of life, the business world, you name it. It's not just submarines, but one thing I learned was that in the roles that we served, you are watched so closely. Everything you do is watched by the crew, by everyone inside and outside. So you have to be confident, competent, and you have to know your job, because they can tell when you're confident and you know what you're doing, and then you go do it.
Some of the unique things of submarine life definitely echo the comments of dealing with that expertise and that competency in the craft that we're doing out there. But, you know, learning to walk six inches shorter throughout the submarine, because we have enough storage space on board for a certain amount of food. but we go to sea for long periods of time. And so you take these number 10 cans of some of your vegetables and things like that, and you line the passageways with them. And you lay down some plywood over the top, and everyone learns to walk a little shorter until you eat your way back to the floor. It's actually a point of celebration on the ship when you've done that, because one, you're that much closer to coming home, and two, you don't have to crouch all the time walking around the submarine. And the other piece is that you learn to be intimate. You give up a lot of personal space luxuries. And I don't know exactly what the figure is, but it's somewhere on the order of a large multi-bedroom house is where those 100+ people are living on board that ship. And it's in close proximity to machinery and weapons and electronics and fans, all those things. It does take a unique person, but I think a lot of people take pride in that uniqueness and the small numbers and what we do.
I'd like to talk a bit about submarine teamwork. A lot of times we watch basketball or football. We just had the Super Bowl not long ago, and you see the true teamwork of team really working together in order to get to the goalpost. On a submarine, you have about 140 to 160, depending on what mission you're on and which type of submarine. And with that, you are working with a crew from people from all over the United States that come together with their unique skill sets. You have some that are specialists in engineering, some that are specialists in weapons, some that are specialists in electronics. And you take that team almost like one synchronized family out for long periods of time at sea, sometimes in terms of port to port. Could be 90 days, for example, for 6-month deployments. And with them, those folks do some incredible things so that you can take those submarines to carry out the mission the nation wants without skipping a beat. Now, there's a lot of training involved, a lot of hard work involved, but quite frankly, it is that magic of teamwork that really is the essence, I think, of submarine.
I think one of the more interesting aspects of submarine life, and something that you don't think about much, but if asked, how long can you stay out at sea and do these kind of operations? And the short answer is that the submarine has essentially an unlimited amount of fuel. So you have a gas tank that is full for about 30 years. 30 years, you have an unlimited supply of fresh water. There's a machine that does some neat things to convert the water to drinkable water. And then you have an unlimited supply of fresh air as well. The machine enables that process as well. So as alluded to by the others, the only thing that limits your time at sea is how much food you have. So being of infinite wisdom, they brought the very best cooks possible on submarines, and they're able to pull together on those big cans that Mel mentioned. These cooks make endless amounts of food, and you can go for months and months and months. So picture yourself in your house, whether it's big or small, with your very best family friends or your craziest uncle, being there for months and months at a time. And so part of what we had to do was to be leaders for these diverse folks, keep them focused on the mission, keep them trained. And it's a testament to what each of these gentlemen have in their cores, because you can imagine how it is after a month or 2 or 3 working so closely with folks. But we always manage to get our missions done, and we're here to talk about it now.
We are charged with staying ready to perform any mission, any day, to support the objectives of the military and the orders of the President of the United States. And so we need to be battle ready all the time. We do plan for specific missions. For example, when traveling to the North Pole, probably 80% of your crew has never been there before. So there's specific training that you do with people who have the experience that have been there. When I went, we went on paths that man had never gone before through different places in the world on the way to the Arctic up north. We install special equipment that you don't normally deal with on a day-to-day basis. And we spend time talking to scientists and other officers and enlisted troops who have been there before. There's no way to explain what it's going to feel like when you take that 15 million pound submarine from 150 feet underwater and you start making it buoyant to go up at 30 feet per minute and you crush against 5 feet of ice. It feels like you've run into a brick wall, but the submarine is designed to do that. But when you take that submarine that's 120 yards long and you put this special equipment on it, you have to control that 120 yard, 15 million pound vessel to within about 1.5 degrees. That's like this much difference. Because you don't want to bring it up with the propeller hitting the ice first. That would be bad. You want to bring it up so that you hit it exactly right. And the amount of training that you need to do with your crew, with your senior and junior people, with some people that have been there before, is an amazing amount of training. And so as a captain of a submarine, you're responsible for all of this training for people who need to run the nuclear reactor under different conditions, for people who are the culinary artists, the cooks on the ship who have to prepare the food, and even for those who are the navigators who have to learn different ways to navigate their way up through the North Atlantic or the North Pacific. Our charge is to have a balanced training program so that you're dealing with all that entire spectrum of responsibility throughout. But one of the things that brought me to, and probably one of the most important philosophies I think pertains for a leader is, my daddy taught me this when I returned home from school. When I graduated, he pulled me over to the corner and said, look, I want you to remember something. You may know more than I know, but you don't know what I know. And the philosophy he was trying to impress upon me was that being smart, quote unquote, is relative to the task at hand. You might have a PhD in physics, but if you don't know where to walk in my neighborhood in Chicago, don't talk about how smart you are. The same is true with the submarine crew. Everybody brings a different set of smarts to the table, and you have to both respect that and build upon it to have a crew that's balanced in its training and in its energy and in its motivation to go do whatever needs to get done to make it happen.
Well, overall, my sense is that the most important trait or characteristic of a successful leader is who they are, its character. I believe that the moral and ethical character of the leader significantly influences the success or failure of an individual or the team. And so therefore, for me, I've always ensured that I maintained a sense of humility. Integrity matters, trust matters, positive attitude is important, and servant leadership, whereby relationships, nurturing relationships is very important, where there's value for diversity and inclusion and mentoring that we've already talked about. So all that's the kind of the character piece. The second is competence. For me, I've always and continue to prepare for opportunity. And preparation for me included knowledge. So I read a lot, formal education, but I listened to the wisdom of others. All that contributed to knowledge, and it should be continuous. The other part is experience, repetition. You have to come to Periscope Depth to be competent. You have to keep doing it until you get it. And so when you talk about competence, the second piece, there's an element of knowledge plus an element of experience. And that's combined to enhance your judgment. So your judgment as you continually improve those elements, that helps you and your team to make the best decisions. And so what's the output product of a leader? Decisions. We don't make widgets, it's decisions with your team. So if your judgment continually improves and you make decisions better, then it becomes habit. And in the submarine force and in life, if you have a habit and a record of the best decisions, then you start to win Super Bowls. Then you start it's a legacy of your leadership efforts. So character and competence are the two elements I feel are most important, and I've kind of described a little bit some of the things that contribute to that.
Leading a team in that environment, it's a challenge in and of itself, and I won't cop out by that as the answer. But when you think about taking a nuclear reactor and a piece of steel and bringing it underwater, that's just the cost of getting there. And then you got to go do something with it, with all of that training and that competency. When the challenges, come above and beyond that, it's about the people, and when you're running them hard, which in my command tour, we had a period there where we were delivering goodness. And one of the curses of delivering goodness is the task to deliver more goodness. And then the challenge there is when to say no, when to go to your boss and say, we have to take a break. And that's not how the wiring is inherently as a submariner. You want to deliver and continue to deliver. And that's how you're brought up through the ranks to your task, accomplish the mission, deliver the goods, and rinse, repeat. So that was a major challenge in looking at the fatigue of the team and seeing us starting to break down in the fundamentals of competency, seeing the decisions to start to be suboptimal. And the breadcrumbs of those mistakes, ultimately, if unchecked, lead to something more catastrophic and unacceptable. So knowing when to say no to your boss and saying, we can't do what you're asking us to do is a big one.
Well, I think you keep the mission focused by your interaction with the crew you're leading and keeping them informed of the importance of the mission and what you expect of them for what you're about to do or what you're doing. Give a couple examples of that piece. I like to sometimes frame it as keep the main thing, because you've got lots of things going on in that regard. And you have, in the cycle of a submarine on deployment, many different training requirements that you're doing as well as operational requirements that you're doing. I can remember specifically doing one of the Western Pacific deployments, and we were going to pull back into Yokosuka in Japan. And it's a rather challenging to take the submarine from at depth, get it up on the surface in a higher contact density, and then maneuver this submarine, which really doesn't look like a regular ship when it's on the surface, for many hours up the Tokyo Wan to get it into port. And really looking at doing that. Well, of course, my executive officer at the time had figured out the day before we're going to do all these things for training so we could get that into completion and move on. And, I said, no, we're not. We're going to rest the crew up because we've got some heavy push-ups to do to get that submarine from underwater up on the surface and then safely into port, where you start that business usually about 3 o'clock in the morning, and then it goes all the way until you pull in, which might not be until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So you're going to run that crew hard. So keeping that focus, and the crew knew, that's the main thing instead of everything, so that you can execute that with the precision that it required.
And we go down, we shut the hatches, we're cut off from those that we love. And the challenge when we're doing our thing, is to make sure that what is left behind can endure that. And it's often forgotten. We're in our day-to-day 40-plus hour weeks, 60-plus hour weeks on working that submarine. If you don't address the latter, don't make sure that the family has what it needs to do its service, which is to keep it together while you're gone, it can fall apart for you. And we had some pretty long times at sea, and that led to some breakdowns in the family. Again, another time, we need some time home because we got some things we need to address, and we need to reconstitute some things with the families before we can go again. So those are some inherent ones I think are tied to the submarine force. I joined the submarine force after graduating the Naval Academy in 1997. I like to see myself amongst this group as the product of a long-lasting legacy. And each one of the individuals sitting to the left and right of me over the course of my career had touch points that helped me go from a midshipman at the Naval Academy all the way to following in their broad and trailblazing footsteps to the USS Jimmy Carter in command, which I left a year and a half ago. It's been the amazing experience of my life, and it's still going for me. And the example that the individuals here set for me is a big piece of that motivation to keep going, because a big part of that is I have to live up to the example that they have set forth and continue to honor what they have done, leading the way for us young folks to pass behind them and serve the nation.
I am amongst the Centennial 7, part of the next generation, along with Mel Smith. And so I'm uniquely positioned where, as I was coming up as a junior officer, I had the opportunity to get to know the Centennial 7 very well. The man to my left was a company officer at the Naval Academy when I was a midshipman, just as I was a company officer when Mel was a midshipman. I went on to become the admiral aide to our first black submarine admiral, Tony Watson, once upon a time. And the other three, we have intermingled and intermixed, as well as the two who aren't here right now. So I consider myself extremely blessed to be kind of the connection between the Centennial 7 and the next generation. There's obvious lessons that I gained from conversations and mentorship from the Centennial 7. One of the things I was thinking, I think there was a question floating around and said, what would you tell your 21-year-old self if you had the chance to talk to them? And one of the things that came to mind was don't discount the struggle too much. And what I mean by that is without that struggle, it would not inform you and prepare you to help other people. It would be perfect if every time we got underway, the weather was good, the meal was good, and we had fair seas. But that's not life. And in accomplishing that, it's important to have the things that buttress resilience and prove to you that you can deal with the challenges as they come. Second thing is to be active and available for those who reach out to me. We talked about the challenges that we've all had. The Centennial 7 have been privy to pretty much all the challenges I have had because I've engaged. Mel Smith don't know none of the challenges. I didn't tell him. I didn't want him to learn from my bad ways. But all these gentlemen at one time or another have bore witness, listened, and advised on some pretty significant challenges that I've had. One of the other things is we talk about legacy. I'm very proud that my son, who is going to graduate from the Naval Academy this year, will be joining part of this legacy as a nuclear submariner. And he did it on his own volition. He kind of grew up in a household where he had a submariner, much like, once again, Admiral Bill Williams. I don't know why I keep biting on you today, but he had an opportunity that we didn't have to see it up close and to understand what that impact is on family and things of that nature. So I think it was Colin Powell said the first job of a leader is to create more leaders.
As a follower of Rich Bryant there to the end, and you asked him his charge, I can say, without beyond a shadow of a doubt, representing a lot of the young people that are surrounding him, that he's doing a pretty good job at making sure that legacy stays alive and well. There's very few that don't know Big Rich Bryant across our force out there. So he's doing that charge, and I think a lot of that comes from the energy that he's gotten from these great mentors.
So I think one of the challenges that kind of goes with integration in general is when you integrate people and things, sometimes we sort of do it one person at a time or one or two at a time. And so oftentimes we think it's me individually against the world because I don't always have someone else to talk to. We don't know what path we'll be on and where we'll be led. And so taking whatever opportunity comes your way and then going and doing the most with it and the very best you can with it, even if your background is like so many of ours. I mean, I didn't know anything about the Navy. I didn't know anything about submarines. And I probably could have tried to refuse to go into submarines, but it turned out to be the best thing I could have ever done. And then part of the beauty of the experience, I think, was that we learn this really special skill, and frankly, lots of these skill sets carry over into other parts of life, the business world, you name it. It's not just submarines, but one thing I learned was that in the roles that we served, you are watched so closely. Everything you do is watched by the crew, by everyone inside and outside. So you have to be confident, competent, and you have to know your job because they can tell when you're confident and you know what you're doing, and then you go do it. But the other part of this life is that submarining, like so many things, it's inherently all about the people that you work with and the people that you lead. And frankly, all the commanders are about the same, but the sailors watch you and then they decide how they're going to support you and help you. But the difference is in how you lead your folks so that they do tell you the things that you need to know. And so part of our life is how do you engage the people with whom you work, because they really can make all the difference in the quality of your submarine, the quality of your life, the quality of your job, and the quality of everything in which you are involved down the road.